What's going on, guys? We've got Jacob Jones here. He is a follower of Jesus, husband and father of five. He's a disciple maker, leader, strategic thinker, dreamer, change consultant, and creator. He's got a lot of things going on. He's also the podcast host of the Green Light Theory podcast, which I was on. So make sure to go check out that episode. It's an awesome podcast. And he's also the owner of Sunfuse Solar. Jacob is a breath of fresh air. He's a guy that's always true and authentic. I enjoy the conversations we've had so far and can't wait to get into this conversation today. But Jacob, tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Hey, Philip, first, thanks for having me on, and thanks for hopping on my podcast a couple months back. So it was an absolute pleasure and lots of knowledge dropped there. Yeah, so I'll back up a little bit, and man, I'll go all the way back to early childhood because I think it's formative in who I am and what I do today. So I grew up a little bit different than most folks. I grew up in bars, and you may think, hey, well, that's a little bit crazy. I didn't know any different. But the beauty in that is I really grew up around folks that were always 30, 40, 50 years older than me. To what that allowed me to do is I felt like I got a lot of different wisdom early on, even though it was a chaotic environment. And where that was formative for me, and I'll touch on this again later once we start really diving in here, is I got to see how people truly interacted with one another. They always say, hey, alcohol's a great inhibitor, right? What it does is it reveals who people really are. Like they get to act a little bit more freely. So I felt like I got from an early age a bird's eye view of how people act and interact, and that would shape things later on. So growing up in the Midwest, we're a little bit different, for sure. I think they call it Midwestern nice. I was surprised because I always thought moving to the South, hey, everybody's super nice. And I found that's not exactly the case. Up in the Midwest, you still go to the grocery store or, stop to get gas. They may talk to you for 30, 45 minutes. Now, to be fair, that could be because only 19 people live in the state of Nebraska, or so it seems at times. But in my early 20s, I started, a sales career in the deregulated energy business. Man, it was a dirty, filthy business, if I'm being completely honest. It was like the Wild West. So energy just deregged in the state of Texas, and everybody was trying to get a piece of that pie. And I counted myself as fortunate, because, hey, I started with this company, a couple guys out of Canada. And the training was a little bit different. Who we kidding? It was a lot different. I come in, and first it was Friday, Saturday, Sunday, basically 1 p.m. to 9 p.m. And first you're thinking, who does training 1 to 9 p.m.? And so, Saturday night after 9 p.m., the owner of the company said, hey, who wants advanced training? And here I'm this new guy. I'm thinking, man, I want advanced training. Let's go. So, we hop in his car, and he takes us a couple blocks away downtown Dallas into this bar. Now I'm really scratching my head, and I'm thinking, what are we doing here? And what Mike Germano was doing is for the next 3-4 hours to whatever closing time, we really just sat around and watched how people acted and reacted with one another. So we were learning, nonverbal plus verbal communication styles and how to use human psychology and human behavior in the sales process. So I didn't quite fully understand it all at that time, but looking back, I was like, genius. Like when you really think about it. And I'm not suggesting, hey, every business take their sales staff out to the bar and call it training. He was obviously a different character, but so the beauty in that, I did that for a couple of years, and Then I had a gentleman that worked for me that, went and hooked up with a startup company. They were out of St. Louis, Missouri in the telecom business. And, so I go, to talk to them. I was, I guess my claim to fame there was I beat the lights on. They didn't have their certificate of occupancy got started. That was a 17-year run in telecom. And then, as the pandemic came around, really, just switched all that into solar, learned some online lead generation, things of that nature. And, done some small business coaching, through the last few years as well, where I'm helping, small business owners really dial in, everything from their sales to their marketing to their systems and recruiting. So that's kind of at least the 30,000-foot view. We can dive into any of those or more as deep or as much as you want to.
Man, that's interesting. I appreciate you sharing, but it's interesting that you grew up in the bars and then some of your first training that I know you use a lot of now is from being in the bars, the looking at people's psychologically how they're reacting and things of that nature. That's definitely something that you have to pick up on. And actually makes me think, I was talking with somebody the other day and they were talking about like how I was supposed to be helping out doing certain work. And I said, look, I know this is what the manager said, but you had to read between the lines. He's like, what do you mean? And I was like, okay, he said what you wanted to hear, but what he really meant was pretty much the exact opposite. And he did not pick up on that at all. And now they did talk over Teams, so there wasn't really a way for you to see them physically because we don't turn on Teams there at work and everything. But still, the fact that he couldn't understand that that guy was just saying that just to say that, to be politically correct, if you will, and reading between those lines. And that's something that's difficult to figure out. And a lot of that does, for me, it came down to I actually know the guy and how he reacts and everything. And,
Yes.
and we've had some other side conversations, so it helped with that. But he just couldn't pick up on that. So it's so important that you do pick up on that. So let's go into that a little bit about being able to look at somebody, whether it be virtual or be in person. And let's go with in person. I think that's more important and something that we should get back to more if we're not already there. But how do you, when you go into a sales conversation or just a conversation in general, how do you pick up on the cues of their body language?
Yeah, first, I think it's probably important for your listeners to really grasp. So even, there was a statistic, and I learned it years ago that only 7% of our communication is the actual verbal, the word. Now, frankly, that 7%, that's probably high today because that was before, really text messaging and all these bots and, you've got your, Facebook Messenger, your WhatsApp, all of that before those became, blew up. So that 7% is probably high. So when we start to think about that, we're like, man, okay, what is that? 2%? That only 2% is the actual physical word that comes out of our mouth. Somebody may be listening to this and they're mind blown by that. I go back and one thing we always teach our sales force, and it's something I learned early on, and it's funny, and if they're just listening, they won't be able to see this, but this was and I'm going to go silent for about 10 seconds, by the way, here, just to show this, but for the listener, what I'm doing is I'm going to give a action with every word without saying the word. So my sales pitch, and by the way, this is 20 years ago, where every single word had an action to it. So, before we were allowed to talk to a homeowner, or that, prospective client, not only did we need to know the words, we needed to know the physical gestures that went along with them. So it was a different degree of training than I feel that a lot of people just aren't held to. So when we, onboard somebody in that, like that is king. A lot of folks, they come in and, hey, day one, they're trying to teach product or company to people. But, day one for us, like we're talking, rapport, we're talking nonverbals. Like we're just dialing into that conversation part for our sales force. And for me, that rapport is huge. And what I, mean by that, rapport, is, a lot of matching and mirroring. And my background, by the way, is NLP. So if you think, Tony Robbins, probably is, the best known NLP practitioner. But I don't know how much he's really teaching that so much today, but that's his base as well. But all NLP is doing is you are learning, things such as, hey, that tone of voice, that pace, that speed, that tempo, your volume, whether that's terminology or keywords, your postures, and your gestures as well. But then understanding that everybody communicates differently, right? There's some people that, man, they're visual. Some folks are auditory. Some folks, hey, they're kinesthetic, so they need to feel something. And if you think about it, one thing we teach early on is if you just listen well enough and ask good questions, that prospect will tell you exactly how they buy. They will tell you their buying style or their listening or communication style, if you will. Mm-hmm. So then you understand and you can tailor that. So what we try to teach our sales guys when we're, in that conversation, and frankly, our customer service, anybody that's in fulfillment, anybody that's talking to a human, you call in and you talk to one of my recruiters, it's the same thing. They're learning these same skills. They're listening and trying to figure out, we'll say something as an example where you say, yeah, I understand what you meant there. Mm-hmm. And when somebody says, hey, I understand, they're more feelings based, right? So, hey, I understand. Hey, I see what you mean there. That's a visual person. Oh, I hear what you're saying. That's an auditory person. So if you just listen closely enough, they will tell you how you need to communicate back to them. And where I feel a lot of people fall short there, Philip, is they're dialed in. They're trying to communicate with everybody how they communicate because that's what's natural to them. But they leave so much on the table, or they fall short in conversation because they're not communicating the way the other person communicates.
Yeah, for sure, man. So many great things to unpack there. First, with the neuro-linguistic programming, one thing I can think of, if somebody's interested, typically they're going to lean on in. They're going to lean into your conversation while you're speaking to them because they're interested. And if they're kind of bored, they may start moving in their chair, or they're trying to look off different directions, or they just like lean back and get away. Here I am getting away from the microphone, but they lean back because they're not interested anymore. So they're either going to come in or they're going to come back. I had another thought and I've already lost track of that, but this is such an important thing for us to learn because it is something that's very helpful. Oh, and then also from a video perspective, especially, but this really translates into real life. If you think about somebody in a boardroom with you and they're just standing there, they're standing still, they're not using their arms. It almost looks robotic. And you're like, is this person okay? First of all, because I can't believe they could just keep their hands next to their side. Maybe they're nervous, but if they're using their hands, it keeps you more visually engaged, even if you're not a visual person, because now this person is actually using their hands. They're moving a little bit. So there's some actions happening. And if you're speaking for 30 minutes or even really over 5 minutes, people are going to start getting bored. So this helps with that as well. So we see that especially in video. If it's always the same pane, nobody's moving, it's just a speaking head, it gets really boring very quickly. And that's why we have 30-second videos now because of that. So using those hands is an important thing, moving around that room and everything. Such an important thing when it comes to speaking, for sure.
Well, and don't miss this. And this is a little bit of an advanced technique, but it's still one we try to teach early on, where you're talking
we're not
about,
at the bar, though. We can't do this advanced technique.
Right. I'm telling you. We could get a cocktail just a little bit early, but hey. But you see, as you're talking about, Philip, hey, leaning back, or leaning forward. So that's the power of matching and mirroring. Because if you match and mirror that prospect or that person you're communicating long enough, what we teach there is, then you can now control, what that other person does. And that may sound crazy to some folks listening, but, we teach an exercise and we have them go we have them go practice on actual strangers with this, where, hey, they will match and mirror them. And then eventually they will grab, their pants or their belt on both sides and hike them up. And the person that they're communicating with will do the exact same thing. Because you've built such a rapport, down to the breathing, and I can touch on that in a second, where they're so in sync with you that you can actually lead them from point A to point B to point C, and that's the beauty and the ins and outs of, NLP, once you really get into it, is being able to take a person from where they are and get them to where they need to be. And understanding, hey, how do I bridge that gap? So you get that person that talks very fast and loud, you match it, and you just gradually start whispering and coming down, and it's crazy because they will do the same and begin to match you as well. So now that's the pacing and leading part, right, of that nonverbal communication. And then when we talk rapport, I always tell folks is, hey, it's breathing is the most important piece. It's also the hardest piece to, get in sync with. And, I'll go somewhere on the, podcast, the way that I learned it is, you think about how we procreate as human beings. And, as you're there, your breathing actually becomes one. Now people are going to run home and they're going to be, tonight, and they're going to be, oh, wait, this is actually, factual, scientific. Like, how is that? It just happens. Or if you start to get, women together and their menstrual cycles become, if they start to change and get closer to one another, it's the same concept. It's rapport. Like, that's just how us humans were built. So as you're talking with somebody, hey, if you can begin to, understand, hey, how they're breathing, match their tone, match their, gestures, this conversation is going to go very well for you, once you flip that to actually leading them at that point, from the matching and mirroring standpoint.
Yeah, man, that's so true. And I think we're going to have a couple of babies that are created from this podcast. Because everybody's going to go try that. But it's very interesting how the human psychology works and how the mind, the body, all of it works, because we are, I think, at the end of the day, supposed to be one. We're supposed to be cohesive, which really goes back to, who we're made from. We're made from God, and there's a reason why all of that is that way. And it's always fascinating to continue to learn things like this. But let's transition here a little bit. I want us to talk more from a business owner perspective, trying to speak with their leadership team when it comes to that communication. I feel like that's a thing that a lot of business owners, especially once they get past that, I'm doing everything myself, but maybe they're still in that phase where they've got some people. How do you go about delegating that work? Because that is a hard thing to do, especially for very first time leadership business owners.
Yeah, for me, it's understanding, two things. A, what do I do well? And B, what do I enjoy doing? Like, those are two huge things for me as the leader, as the business owner. And sometimes those align and sometimes they don't. So the way that I, always have looked at that is, and that first piece that's king for me is really, hey, is this something I do better than anybody else in the company? If it is, that means I do it, whether that's my passion or not. Because if I do it, if that's what I'm gifted at and more gifted than anybody else, my job. If it's something that, that is not, doesn't fall in that bucket, I've got to delegate that. Like, I've got to find somebody else that can do that. The other hard and fast rule, for me and my companies, and, really what I drive folks to is, there's one lever. And it's funny because people talk to me about it all the time. And it's, does it create revenue or does it cost revenue? And if it creates revenue, I'm involved. If it's cost revenue, I'm not involved at all. I want to report, I want, some feedback on that. But if it is not something that is revenue producing, I don't spend my time on it. Like I've got to have somebody else. So, and that's even early on. So someone may be listening, they're a solopreneur where it's only them. Leverage VAs, figure out, hey, if it's not making revenue, I've got to get that off my plate. Now I understand when you're first starting out, that may not be feasible, right? But that ought to be the first goal is, hey, this stuff that does not produce revenue, how do I get it off my plate as quickly as humanly possible? Because what that does for everybody listening, it now allows you to have your time dialed in to things that actually create revenue. And understand this, for everybody listening, people say all the time, hey, you've got 168 hours in the week. That's hogwash. And I say that's hogwash. It's factual because that's how many hours, are in the week. But you really have about 112 that you can play with, because the rest of them you're sleeping. So, we all got, roughly 112 hours to play with. And if you're spending, even 20 of those hours a week on stuff that's not creating revenue, it's costing you, right? It's costing you speed. It's costing you growth. It's costing you money. It's costing you your future. So you've got to figure out, hey, how do I offload that? Whether that's, VAs making a hire, or if it's a married focus, it's your husband, your wife, your kid, like who can help pick up or what can I automate? That's another big one. A lot of folks are still doing steps that, can frankly be automated for them.
Yeah. And I like that. That's definitely I'd almost say a more simplistic approach because I've always heard it kind of like there's 10, 100, and 1,000 hour type jobs. And so you being the business owner, obviously want to get closer to those $1,000 an hour type jobs versus the 10 and 100 and go delegate those. But I do like that's money making versus non-money making. And I think especially when you're first starting out, that's probably better. Once you start building up this system and you're starting to get, I would say probably over 10 employees that aren't VAs, they're actual employees in your office. Not that VAs aren't employees, but they're people usually doing admin work. I'm talking about people doing other stuff. In my mind, that would probably be a better approach too. I mean, you still obviously as the owner and everything, you want to be around that money, the money generating stuff, but there may be more higher level money generating stuff because maybe you're not in sales anymore. That's obviously money generating activity, but maybe that's not an important thing anymore. Maybe you need to be more in that CEO or COO kind of role and a thing like that. What are your thoughts around that? I mean, does that just always how you keep it, or do you think there's maybe a transition period? I mean, just curious on your thoughts.
You're talking about on the sales side?
No, sorry. About like, I guess I look at it a little different where you kind of do based on hourly rates.
Yeah,
Obviously they're arbitrary, but kind of like that. Do you go with the things that actually can make more money? I guess it's all kind of money generating, if you will, but.
No, yeah, it is. And I think you need to look at that based on your business and what you do, right? And I say that you may look at something and you're thinking, hey, today, maybe I'm a coach and I have this product, or I've got a business and I got this product. So it's not the highest revenue producing thing, but it has the potential. And I think where a lot of people do that, they look at it and they're trying to quantify, hey, what was my actual return on this? And sometimes, that return isn't an immediate return. So you got to look at it more of a big picture that, what could this pay off to? And I think too, even in that, and why I like to say, hey, revenue versus non-revenue activities is that keeps me focused on things that move the company forward. And not being tied up on that money. Now, eventually, I think that's a great concept as you grow. Right. So, I mean, here's the thing. Sometimes if it's me and I've got one other person in my business, it's just a 2-person shop. Okay. I've got them doing operations, everything that is, non-revenue producing. I'm revenue producing. Yes. Hey, my time might be $1,000 an hour. but I might have to do that $100 job, until we're, grown enough where, okay, now I can make that middle management hire, if you will, plug them in and begin to delegate those. So sometimes that's not feasible just based on where you are in your business journey.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that I think couples that for me that really drives home. I use a system every day. Today's Saturday, otherwise I'd pick one up and show you. But Monday through Friday, you can't catch me without an index card. And my index card that's my day. And at the bottom of my index card, it has 1, 2, 3. These are 3 things that will most propel my business forward that day. So, as I look and say, hey, what do I need to accomplish? Like I already know, hey, these revenue producing things come into my bucket, but these 3 things have to get done. So that's where I focus, is like, I don't care about my to-do list or any of that. I get to that stuff. I've got a system for that, but those 3 things are king. Like I've got to accomplish these 3 things no matter what. So instead of having 20 that I get to check off boxes and feel good, these 3 things aren't normally the easy things, but they're the things like, man, this is what I do first. And until these are done, I don't do anything else. Like everything else can wait, because this is what's going to move us forward.
Man, that's so great. It makes me think of the power list that Andy Frisella talks about a lot, which I would say is similar, but you talk about to-do lists and everything. So definitely great way to go about making sure that you get those things done that have to get done, that are going to move the company forward, because there's always so many things that we can just do and get distracted with and feel like we've done so much, and they do need to get done, but they're not the things that are going to move the needle forward. Mm-hmm. So it's really awesome that you do that. And I like that you use an index card and have that around. And I'm sure your team knows all about that. But kind of going back, when we talk about building up this team and you're starting to delegate that workout, what does that conversation look like? Because sometimes maybe it's stuff that you don't want to do, and maybe you're pushing that on somebody else. It's like, hey, I don't want to do this, so you're going to do this. I know you're not saying that, but what's a good way that you've used to be able to get other people inspired to do the work that maybe you don't necessarily want to do, or you're trying to offload because you need to focus on bigger things?
Yeah, so it's twofold for me, at least internally. I know this is different for different companies, but one of the things that's important for me internally, and I've just operated this way for years, I only hire people with 0 experience. And that sounds crazy to a lot of people, because they want to go out and they want to find everybody that has the experience. Here's what I found is people that have all the experience, they've got a great resume. They also come with habits, systems, ways of doing business that may not be congruent with what you do. So what I found out is, hey, I can hire an entry level person, and I'm confident enough in my ability to train and develop that I can get them there. And, what that does is, 1, it increases loyalty. 2, is they generally start cheaper, because they don't have the experience. That's a plus for a business owner. But the, bigger piece to that is they learn our system, our culture, our ways. And so as you say, hey, how do I communicate that? There's really 2 pieces. And this is one, whether, a business operates that way or they hire with experience. I live by, it's an acronym MAWL, MAWL. So this is how we develop leaders. So the M is model. And why I preface that with why we hire from the entry level is I don't have a leader in, any of my companies that is going to lead you to do something that they haven't already done. There's not a job that I haven't done, because, I'm of the firm belief is I can't teach you from theory. Right. I can't show up and say, hey, let's do it this way. I've never done it, which is why even on my, with my coaching clients, like my business is important to me. And the reason that's important to me, it's my concept. Like I can't come tell you, hey, I'm going to help you build out your sales team. I'm going to help you improve this if I haven't done it myself. So people ask all the time, hey, will you get rid of your business? Probably not, or I'll start another one, because I want people that I'm coaching to be able to look and say, oh, he's doing that, because there's so many people in that space that have never had a business, but they're coming in and telling you how to do A, B, C, and D, or, even if it wasn't their business, they haven't done it inside another business, if you follow me there. Because it's, don't hear me wrong. Some people work in, Fortune 500 companies and they learn some phenomenal things, right? And they probably had more on their plate than some small business owners. So, so that is legit, but have you done it? So that's model, right? So the first thing we're always going to do before we offload something, we want to make sure that we model it. That A is assist. So now we want to do it together. So, it's not, think of, model 100%, the modeler, me as an example. That assist is a 50-50. So now we're going to do that together. And then the W is watch. So now it's 100% them, but I'm there in support. So I'm making sure, auditing, if you will, that they've got the training, they do it our way, they do it efficiently, they do it, and it's congruent with our core values. And then that L is launch. Now we launch them out. And see that difference there. And I always use think about teaching like a Greek versus a Jew. Like that's the easiest way I can tell folks what this looks like. In our American school system, we learn like the Greeks. What happens is a teacher stands up at the front of the class and gives you all the information. And a lot of companies work this way as well because it's what they learned from elementary school on. They go in, they do a training class, and then they say, go apply it. Yes, they gave you the information and said go. So that's that's a very Greek way of teaching. So the Jews do it a little bit differently. It's more of a discipleship or mentorship model. To kind of explain what that looks like is and it still happens today, and it's happened since Adam and Eve. So you would have Jewish kids born into a Jewish house, and they begin to study the Jewish scriptures. And there's a culling. So, they reach like 8, 9 years old. And then based on what they know, some of them go on to, the midrash, and some of them, go to regular school. And then, a couple years later, there's another culling. Some of them, then go to the next level of education. Some of them then go learn a trade. And then eventually they get to go live with a rabbi. Why? Because they want to see the rabbi model these things with his family in the community, how people are coming to him. So that way he gets to work with them, and then he gets to go do those things. So what you're really seeing is someone that is well versed because they've seen it modeled, they've done it together, they've now been watched or audited. And now they can go do it on their own. And what we found is they're just much more proficient, right, in what they do. So it's been a system that works, great for us. Again, that really comes down to, what is your dedication to, training and development, of the individuals, and really walking them and shepherding them through that process. So hopefully that was a long-winded answer to give you that with some examples.
No, that's great. I do like that example a lot, and I agree that a lot of times what happens is you're given a little bit of information. All right, go figure it out. Like what? And of course, as an employee, you're freaking out because you're like, I could get fired if I don't do this right. And a lot of times that's not the case. That what happens, usually it's almost worse, because rather than you getting fired, now the business owner just says, you know what, I'll just take care of it. And then they just push you out of the way. You never learn. And then it's like a year or two later, all of a sudden it's like, what in the world does Philip even do here? Like, he's always just doing hardly anything. I don't even know what value brings. And all of a sudden you're like, well, crap, I've got nothing to fire him because it's not like he's done anything wrong. Or you just go ahead and fire him. And they've wasted all this time and money rather than you actually teaching them and then watching them do it and making sure they don't fail. And then finally they're equipped enough to go out and do it themselves. So I like that approach, the MAWL approach: model, assist, watch, and launch. That's awesome.
Yeah, it served us well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I can definitely tell your companies are thriving in everything. But let's go ahead and go on to the last question here, Jacob. I appreciate this time. I think it's the art of delegation, neuro linguistics programming, NLP, all that good stuff.
That's a
Is
mouthful, isn't it?
Yeah, it is a mouthful. Definitely something that we need to work on, be able to look at people and see how they're interacting with us, as well as making sure that we interact with them properly, because those body language is so important. So a lot of great content that we covered here today. But I want to ask you, if you could only share one message for the rest of your life, what would that message be?
Yeah, that's simple. So it is something I've seen modeled for me, perfectly from my mother, is meet people right where they're at in life, but love them enough not to leave them there. And I'll unpack that a little bit. What I mean by that is everybody, whether it's you relationally, in ministry, as a parent, in the workplace, everybody that you come into contact with every day is going to be at a different place. Meet them right where they are, but you got to love them enough, right, to not leave them there. And one of the things I always, tell people is, I don't look at you for who you are today. I look at you as, hey, what potential do you have? And so I want to communicate to that future you. And what I found is when you do that, a lot of people that are out in the world, they just have never had anybody that believed in them. They haven't had anybody that looked at them beyond who they are or what their past was. So when you begin to unpack that and treat them that way, that, hey, you just meet them there, faults, warts, every ugly thing, every beautiful thing that's about them. And then, figure out, hey, what is their potential? What are their dreams? And then how do I speak to that to get them there? So I think that's, the most powerful thing we can do as human beings, for one another is that alone.
I think it's so true. Seeing that true value that they have. Oftentimes we think about the fact that, we don't have this worth, and we don't think about what worth we can have down the road, because we may only be worth so much now, but we're worth so much more later on, as long as we continue to grow and everything like that. So it's a great message, and I appreciate you sharing that as well. But Jacob, if people want to find you and get to know you more, where is the best place for them to find you?
Yeah, I think the easiest one is just greenlighttheory.com. From there you can find all my social channels. That's the easy one. Tune in, and it's not me talking most of the time. 90% of that is guests talking. What that's really built around, Philip, is having folks on that have hit roadblocks in life, or red lights, if you will, and really walking through, hey, how do we help other people? How do we give back, right? Meeting them where they are, but love them enough to, help them skip those red lights, turn them into green lights so they can just go, go, go.
Love it. Yeah, it's a great podcast. So make sure that y'all go check that out. Definitely go follow Jacob. He's got a lot of great advice there. But thanks for coming on.
Hey, thanks for having me, Philip. It's been a blast. Thanks, brother.